Gary Weber, to your left over there, has done about 30,000 hours of meditation and yoga with various teachers in various disciplines and countries, and experienced the falling away of the I and the loss of self-referential internal narrative, fears, and desires. A PhD in physical sciences, he worked in military, national labs, industry, and academia in research and development and management. He has 2 daughters and authored Happiness Beyond Thought, A Practical Guide to Awakening, Dancing Beyond Thought, the Bhagavad Gita, the verses and dialogues for awakening, and Into the Stillness, dialogues on awakening beyond thought with Richard Doyle. Richard Doyle, gentleman on the right here, he's a professor in liberal arts research at the Penn State University, where he has taught since 1994. Ever since reading the work of futurist Alvin Toffler at age 12, Doyle has been on a scholarly and personal quest to understand the effects of information technologies on the evolution of human culture and consciousness. After completing a PhD at UC Berkeley and a postdoctoral fellowship at MIT, he has received grants from the National Science Foundation and written scholarly books on the effects of information technologies on human evolution and the effects of language and consciousness. He's also authored many, many books. Ones that you're probably very familiar with is Darwin's Pharmacy. He also coined the term ecodelic, for those of you that are familiar with that, and I'm sure he'll explain that a little bit more. The basic setup here is we'll have a little discussion and question and answer first, and then we'll have a dialogue, maybe a little break for bathroom, and then we'll have a dialogue after that with Richard Doyle. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you, Larry. I just wanted to say how thankful I am that you reached out on that email, and it serendipitously worked out that I was going to be coming to the Bay Area. You just said, oh, if you ever come to the Bay Area, please show up. So here I am, and Gary Weber's graciously agreed to do what we just do about once a week, basically, which is we get together and we see what it is that's going to emerge spontaneously out of wherever it comes from. And so I think the way we'll work it is we'll see what it is that we say, and then we'll see what you say back to us, a result of what we say. So probably we don't know how long it's going to go, maybe 15 minutes, maybe shorter, maybe longer. And then a really big, important part of it would be a question and answer period with the audience. And then I'll do my best after that to narrate some of my spelunking around in Aurobindo land, and again, go to some question and answer and have some good fun. So without further ado, I just have a question for Dr. Weber. I'm going to see if we can, can you hear me okay like this if I talk, because I want to talk to Gary, because that's what we're going to be doing. Yes? Good. So Gary, what happened?
What happened? Well, the cliche answer is nothing happened.
Yeah. Okay, questions.
That's all I have. Well, I was trying, just a quick rundown. I was in graduate school and walking down the hill towards campus, and at one of these moments where I could look and see I was unhappy, late 70s, healthy, 2 kids, had enough money to get through grad school, and was feeling really not good, suffering a lot. I had suffered a lot up until I was late 20s. And so it was one of these step-back moments. And I could see that my unhappiness was largely caused by this never-ending, I call it blah, blah, this recursive dialogue that never seemed to end up here. This is an unpleasant thing for many people. There's a recent study done at UVA. They looked and they took 150 undergraduates. They always drag out the undergraduates, and had them set one at a time in a big empty room, and said you get 15 minutes to be with your thoughts. Just no toys. You just sit there by yourself and enjoy the pleasure of your own thoughts. And not surprisingly, in the course of 15 minutes, people were really unhappy. 89% of them said, "No, this is not cool. I don't like this. This is not pleasant at all." So maybe it's just because we have them in a strange environment. So we'll send them back home, back to their pods. Go back to your pods and tell us how it worked out. Do the same thing. Well, of course, 1/3 of them cheated right away, and so they got out of the study. The other 2/3 had the same report, unhappy. So maybe it's just because we're doing undergraduates. Let's get people from around town. So they went out and they got some farmers, people from the farmers markets, people from a church, average age 40s. Same thing happened. They didn't like it either. So, okay, maybe try one more thing. Let's take about 50 undergrads, bring them back in here, and take the ones who really say, do you like electric shocks? And they said, no, I don't like electric shocks. Okay, you're in the group. So then they said, okay, we're going to give you a button in your hand, and we're going to connect it to your ankle. Now, on your ankle, we're going to have a very strong shocking anklet. If you push the button, you get a really strong shock. So if you're sitting here for 15 minutes and it's really not working for you, you're really unhappy, you can stop yourself. You can bring yourself out of this thing by giving yourself a painful electric shock. So maybe surprisingly, what happened is they shocked themselves. Not all of them. 2/3 of the guys did, but only 1/4 of the girls did. So, guys really are dumber than girls. But the girls did it more often. 2.3 times on average they shocked themselves rather than listen to their own thoughts. So this is a typical reaction. People do not like to have this narrative going on. So I decided to see if I could stop mine. And I launched off into a bunch of different approaches, ended up in Zen and classical self-inquiry, Ramana Maharshi's stuff. There was also a 14th century Japanese monk called Basui who did the same thing. Very simple, questions. Who am I? Which everybody's asked themselves existentially. There's also where am I? Which I jumped upon. Because to me, who am I can get very discursive and analytical and philosophical. But as a physical scientist, I thought, well, surely something like where am I should be something I should be able to answer. Because it's running around all day up there, yelling at something. Where could it be? Is it up there anyplace? And that tends to, stop the thoughts. You can also ask, when am I? Which seems like a nonsensical question. You believe you're here all the time. So why would you ask, when am I? Well, if you look at yourself in the course of a day, as Virginia Woolf famously said, you have as many different personalities as you have relationships. If you watch as you go through your day and you talk to your friends, 2 friends, 3 friends, partner, whatever, you can see yourself change. The idea being to just start to undermine this belief that we are one solid entity. We find out we're actually a bunch of entities. And we find if we look for ourselves, where am I? With our best neuroscience, we're getting much, much better at neuroscience. Stuff we didn't know 10 years ago is everybody agrees on now. And you can't find the I anyplace. There is no little place that sits inside and makes decisions and guides things like a Woody Allen movie. It's actually just a bunch of energy sweeping across the cortex, activating different brain regions, hooking them together as time goes on. There is no place where you are. You don't even exist as an entity up here. You're just a floating functionality. So I just kept doing those questions. And then what happened, to answer Rich's question, is that my thoughts stopped. They just stopped. I did a lot of meditation beforehand, a lot of yoga beforehand, a lot of different schools, mostly in Zen. But Ramana Maharshi's work was really key. And it just stopped. I was doing a yoga posture. Went up inverted posture, went up into it, and it was the usual blah, 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 blah. And I just stopped. I came down, it was gone. And it was quiet. It's been quiet for 17 years in there. And so I can still pass for being functional. And you can, to my great surprise, at the time this happened, I had 1,000 people working for me, 4 research labs, and a $250 million budget. And I had nothing up here, just nothing going on. And so I was like, well, this is going to be interesting.
Did you get raises?
No.
When there was nothing going on.
No, so I went to work. And I thought, well, we're going to either throw stones at me or they'll see glowing light or, nothing. Nobody noticed, which may say something about corporate management. But nobody noticed. And the big surprise to me was that I found I was much higher functionality-wise than I was before, because I wasn't losing all this bandwidth and all this energy that's consumed up here with that never-ending diatribe. Much more creative And if you went to meetings, of any kind of meeting, I was in a bunch of big meetings, you just sat there. And amazingly, what happens is out of no place came a really creative, unbelievably synchronistic, useful piece of information that you didn't think up. I mean, we know you don't think up what you say. If you watch carefully, you don't think up what you say, really. You don't even think up what you think. Just watch carefully and see that you don't do either of those things. So this narrative up here is like a parallel universe. Has nothing to do with what's going on in your life. It's talking about another thing that's going to happen someday, but never does. And so you can get much better functionally. And I found I was much better afterwards in every meeting, and I was the only person in the room. Sitting in the room, the big meeting, and the rest of the people, they were only there part-time. They were there maybe 10% of the time, 15% of the time. But if you're there all the time, and you're really present for the meeting, everything that happens, you look like the smartest person in the room, because nobody else is there for the rest of the meeting. So it actually was a great technique and a big surprise to me that I could, function after this thought stopped. But I did. I continued that thing. So those of you who are worried about going to the great stillness, a horrible dark place, it's not a horrible dark place, as Rich can tell you, and he very well. It's a very sweet place. I mean, I thought, it's the traditional Heart Sutra thing, you think it's going to be sunyata, some horrible deep void, and you're going to be sucked into the never-ending darkness. And that isn't what happens. I mean, the brain likes this place. It wants to be in this place. It doesn't like to be confused, chaotic, and depressed. It wants to be still, in charge. Things are working very well, thank you very much. And so it will eventually, as you work it down the word, and it gets more and more still, more and more locked down, and the brain forms this new operating system that Rich and I have talked about before, that becomes what the brain wants to keep you in. And so the brain then, all by itself, since you've whittled down the I, the brain all by itself says, okay, we're going to lock this down. The ones before weren't quite good enough. This one, we're going to lock it down. And so it starts giving you lots of dopamine, lots of endogenous opioids, to make this so pleasurable that you will not leave it. And so you worry about, well, am I going to ever think again? But you find yourself staying in now, now, now. It's a very magnificent place. It's not just the intersection of past and future. It is a whole very pregnant, very powerful OMG type space. And you will stay in that place. It's the sweetest game in town. So to me, this has been a big surprise on many levels. One last one, I'll give it to Rich then, is you lose your free will. You never had it, turns out. We've got lots of neuroscience can prove to you don't have any free will. People still say, but really you don't have any free will.
They can't help it.
They can't help it. They can't help it with no free will. But for me, and I was very determinist, but it turns out, the I fell away, the thoughts stopped, fears fell away, desires fell away, self-referential ones, and it was obvious, since there was no I there was nobody to have free will, nor be in control. And so I found myself in this, what's going to happen? Not only do I have nothing talking up here, I have nobody in control. There's nobody in charge here. And yet, amazingly, my life went on even better than before. Because I never was in charge. I just now understand fully I never have been.
So what you're saying is that what goes on in the noggin is that most people, or like 2/3 of men and some percentage of women, prefer to shock themselves with great intensity of electricity. So we're basically saying, hey, why don't you stop hitting yourself in the face all the time? No, I mean, it's the equivalent of that, but which we accept as the background noise or baseline experience of existence, that of course this is what existence is like, that I'm constantly engaged in this process of self-flagellation, because without that self-flagellation, I simply wouldn't be able to survive, is the narrative that we have. But it really raises the question, because obviously, if everybody was going around punching themselves in the face constantly, you would say, hey, welcome to first grade. This is the introduction to not punching yourself in the face. Why isn't it more widespread? Why is this sense of deletion of the ongoing jangly sense of the I appear to be so rare? And why do we invent complicated ways of avoiding it, like shocking ourselves or engaging in Baroque explanations that rely on unverifiable results?
But this is a relatively recent innovation, this I thing we have. As near as we can tell, no other species has it in the same way, the self-referential thought that we have. Maybe 75, 80,000 years ago, we developed this thing. We broke off from chimpanzees 6 million years ago. So this is just an evolutionary flash in the pan that we're working with right now. It was very useful for us. We started getting bigger and bigger numbers, and we found out that we could coordinate our activities. You know, we could decide, you know, you guys are supposed to, you plant the crops, and you people will harvest them, and you'll go over here and you'll mill the grain. No other species can do that. Take large groups of members, do complicated tasks, assign them, reassign them, move things around. We developed the ability to ravage the entire planet if we chose to. And, you know, control it, but ravage it if we chose to do that. And we had four of our species very close to us at the same time. And there was no reason to believe that we were going to be the successful one. And yet somehow we were not the strongest, we weren't the fastest. We might have been kind of the smartest, but not necessarily so. But by learning how to organize ourselves into big organizational structures and assign tasks and communicate, assign tasks, you know, I have this, and you need to go over there and take that, and I'll take the zebra, and you go over there and kill the giraffe. By being able to do that, we just swept across the globe, wiped out our four competitors, and have just, you know, stomped ever since then. But the problem is, I mean, this is evolutionarily evolved into us now. You know, we now believe we have this I, this symbolic logic, this I wants you to get the zebra logic. That's not something you have to have. Chimpanzees, basically identical to us genetically, basically identical, 99.96 difference. Don't have it. They don't do it. Almost no two chimpanzees ever carry a log. They'll carry a log. They'll carry in small groups, 5, 6, 8 people, chimpanzees. They don't go around and make big temples to the great chimpanzee.
That we know. I saw the Discovery Channel.
That we know. They don't do any of the bizarre things we do as far as religion. We're the only species that does that. We have some very unique and strange characteristics, and the question now before the House is, this was very useful for us to dominate the planet, living every place we can possibly be on the planet. But now, is it really helping us? We needed it to get rid of lions and tigers and bears and crush our enemies and other football teams or whatever. But is it helping us now? Or is it really the biggest source of our problems? All of our anxieties, depression, endless worries about, you know, what's going to happen at the office, what did Mary say to me, what's John going to do, I can't believe he said that to me, goes on all day long. We used to have like 5,000 thoughts a day, supposedly, 100 years ago. We now have supposedly 55,000 thoughts a day. Now, we clearly don't need that many thoughts to get through our day. But we are at a breakneck pace, running out of bandwidth, totally consuming our days with this never-ending narrative. And so the question is, can we unwind this potency of this I thing, this construct, to a way that we can live with it or live without it some way? And I found it to be a really good step forward, but you know, it is an anti-evolutionary or a break from evolution to go into a new operating system and say, look, it's time for a beta version or an OS 2 or something that's different than what we have right now. Because what we have right now ain't working. It's just not working for us.
One way of looking at it is as an attribute of evolution, in fact, that consciousness is finally looking at the conditions from which it is emerging and noticing all of this tremendous unnecessary suffering. But as you point out, like, I think your answer to my question, why is it so rare, is that it's so deeply wired into the evolutionary and cultural infrastructure within which we live that even the existence of it is rendered dubious. In other words, that is it possible to imagine being in a state beyond thought? And we should underline the idea that being in a state beyond thought does not mean being in a state beyond ideas. Far from it. The flow of ideas becomes something like, some kind of a torrent that flows through one as the self-referential thoughts that are worried about what is occurring get out of the way. But the question still remains why it is that it is so rare. In other words, that, that yes, it's built into the cultural infrastructure. Yes, it's built into the evolutionary infrastructure. But we have a wide variety of traditions that testify to the possibility of living beyond thought. You have the Zen tradition that you mentioned. You have Ramana Maharshi. You have the contemplative tradition of Christianity. You have elements of Sufism, and so on. It feels like that, in fact, that we don't want this. That something about being on the other side of stillness wants the ongoing jangling, idiotic monkey brain. What's the best tactic, you think, for convincing the monkey brain that actually it's no longer needed and that, in fact, all of this jangle is much ado about nothing?
Yeah. I mean, one thing it's possible. I mean, I didn't know it was possible. This was 40-some years ago, and there were pterodactyls circling in the air when I started doing this thing. And we didn't know anything. I mean, we had no guidelines about non-duality. It was an obscure philosophy, but we didn't pragmatically know. And my idea was to do it completely scientifically, just do exactly what you could legitimize yourself. And I didn't know it was possible. And I think that's what it starts. We start talking to people, and they think, hey, you're crazy, you're deluded, you're psychotic, whatever. But it turns out not to be the case. And I think it's just bad press or not enough press to recognize you can do this thing. This is not rocket science. You don't have anything I don't have. This is not special to me. I just wouldn't accept the fact that it was impossible. And second thing, it was really been important in the last 10 years especially, we now have solid neuroscience. We really do understand how we stop this brain from doing what it does. I was in a big study at Yale, 10,000-hour plus or minus meditators, and we would lie in fMRI at Yale, and they could watch the brain operate. It turns out there are 11 little centers in the center of your brain, a lot of them very deep down in here, and they make the sense of selfing. They make the I and how it functionally operates in the course of the day. There are 2 side centers, and there's 2 core nodes. And one core node's way down in here, the other one's way down in here in the center line. And if you can stop either one of those from activating, then in fact your thoughts will stop. And we could sit in the Yale MRI line, the Yale MRI, and you could watch it real time. You could watch this center turn on and turn off. You could feel how it felt to turn on. You could feel how it felt to turn off. In my case, I mean, if you meditate, you can keep it out of there. If you're doing a task you like, if you're rock climbing, if you're wingsuiting, if you're doing something that really engages you, any vocation or avocation, you'll go into another circuit. This thing is in the center here, and this tasking circuit is over here. And what happens then is you're either in here, and you're just going blah, 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 or you're doing something that you really like to do, and you're over here, and then this thing shuts down. So it's this dance between the tasking circuit, which keeps it shut down, and as soon as you stop tasking, you're back into blah, 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 blah. So what I did was shut this down all the time. And so I'm tasking, full efficiency, full functionality, and the rest of the time, you go back to this place, but it's quiet. That's what happens. And if you don't stop these back and forth, the idea is to have one or the other working. There's some things up here that make this decide, this side, this side, this side, going back and forth. If you can't stop this from going back and forth, what happens? You get ADHD. ADHD is you've got this blah, blah here that will not shut up. You go over here and start doing tasks, trying to do tasks, complicated tasks, and this jumps over, and it's jumping up and down on top of the tasking circuit. So the tasking circuit can't get its job done because this blah, blah won't shut up. So we now understand how it happens. And for this crowd, not just this crowd, but amazingly, and Rich knows more about this than I do, I'm a virgin on psychedelics, but you can take mushrooms, you can take ayahuasca, and you can shut down this center in exactly the same way as I shut mine down by meditating. The question is, can you make it persistently? Mine stays shut down naturally. I don't do anything to make it shut down. It's just shut down. I've deconstructed the I, it's gone. But you take mushrooms, same thing happens. Same signature arises, same center back here shuts down. Ayahuasca, recent stuff,